evening. Welcome everyone to the Maitland City Council meeting of September 13th, 2021. If you would please silence any devices you have. And let's go right to the Pledge of Allegiance. Anybody would rise with me and Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Our first order of business is the public hearing. Resolution adopting the tentative millage rate. Let's see. Mark, can I count on you? I'm sorry, this is the title, sorry.
A resolution of the City of Maitland, Florida, adopting the tentative levy of ad valorem taxes for fiscal year 2022 and providing for an effective date.
Thank you. Sharon, can you introduce guys? Welcome back, Sharon. Thank you for being here and coming for this portion of the meeting. We missed you terribly, but Mark has held us in good stead in your absence.
Well, we know I wouldn't miss a budget meeting. No, it doesn't matter. Just give me a minute because I'm going to pull up floor property.
I think my computer at the same time.
We'll be good for a minute there. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. It should be in front of you as well. So where we left off, just a summary of the budget. The revenues are unchanged, and there may be some changes in the next 2 weeks. We'll go back and look at where all the revenues are, see if there's some tweaks. The general operations, again, unchanged in terms of what we have there. It's the same number of budget reductions we had in the budget draft, which leaves after, same budget that we have this year with the changes and the additional revenues, you still have funds remaining of $423,000 and some change. So where the budget then takes a turn into the red is with the CIP. Right now the CIP is at $1.7 million. We already funded the Mohican sidewalk, so that has come out, and it is in 21. So that has come out of 22 by funding them early. And then the recommendations. And so when we came to you in July, we had about $1 million in recommendations, and those were a multitude of positions. What I've included in here now is just the police positions. Those have been cycling through for the last 3 years. Those are something that we've talked about, and we think that they're needed for 22, and they're also a mid-year add. The other recommendations, we really haven't had a chance. I've been gone for 5 weeks. We really haven't had a chance to talk about them, and none of them are critical for 22. So in order to look at each one of them, they're all different. We've got the urban forestry, which is 2 positions. We've got additional firefighters, which is a bigger discussion because it involves capital outlay and ultimately an entire battalion of firefighters. So it's a longer term discussion I think we need to have. It's not a commitment to just 3 firefighters. It's accounting for growth and trying to get ahead of it, and that's something we haven't really had a detailed discussion of. What are all the implications of that, as well as the other positions for public works that, again, I think we can put a pin in those. They were all mid-year ads anyways. We have open positions as it stands. We're not getting a lot of applications for positions, just like everyone else, so I don't know if we'd be even able to fill them if we open them mid-year, but none of them are going to be, critical to the year. And I think you want to have more discussion because those additional $700,000 puts the budget in the red and was what drove that 5.0 millage rate that was advertised on the tax bills. And that's about almost a 20% tax increase. And there's really been no citizen input on that tax increase. The bills went out, but people are busy with the Delta variant and back to school and everything that's going on. So I think it'd be fair to say they probably haven't been paying attention to something that comes and says this is not a bill, because that's what it says. So I think think it'd be worthwhile, and, you know, this is just my suggestion, is to have more discussion on those other positions. And you can always amend the budget, you can use the rescue fund monies, you can, you know, look at adding them in October and having some citizen budget meetings, hopefully once things wind down, where they can give input into those ideas and whether they support a tax increase, or maybe they have alternative ways to fund them. Maybe we can find alternatives to funding them. Whatever you want us to look at, you know, contracted versus in-house. There's a lot of ways to look at all of these. And I don't think we've had that opportunity because I've been gone for 5 weeks. So, you know, it's sort of lingered. But again, none of those are critical. I think they're all needs that we want to talk about, but I think we have time to talk about those between now and either mid-year, which is March or April, or next year, and be able to communicate to residents why a tax increase might be needed for those additional positions. So that's sort of where I headed with this. So of the CIP of the 1.7 million, you can fund, I'll go down here, 1.1 million of it from what the CRA is paying back. So the CRA was loaned $12 million from the general fund for debt service and projects and operating expenses over the year. And there are years, and there always was a commitment that when those funds came back, they would be used in the neighborhood, you know, to fund things outside of the CRA, because they did come from the general fund, utility fund, park trust fund, and road impact fee fund. So that's one-time CIP projects and one-time money, which is totally, you're not going to build those sidewalks twice, you build them, they last a really long time. And then, so that leaves essentially a balance of $500,000, which you can balance with American Rescue Fund money if you want to as a one-time stopgap. You can take it out of our undesignated fund balances at, you know, 8.2 million. It's not going to tank the undesignated. You could take it, we have a CIP of 1.2. You all have an operating contingency of 750,000 that's in there for unanticipated needs. And even with that, we take up our emergency designation, we're taking it up to 4.2, we're taking up our vehicle to 3.2. So it leaves us with a really healthy fund balance, even if you were to not use the rescue funds, which you can do, and take it from fund balance. And then just to switch, and looking here at what, if you wanted to cover that 500,000 not using fund balance. And again, this is capital. This is $500,000 worth of capital. So it's one-time expenditures. It's the balance of the CIP. A millage rate of 4.4937 would cover off, you know, the balance. That would generate another 500,000. And that percentage-wise, let's see, 4.4937. That would cover all of it with a positive $36. And that would be, again, we're trying to come to an ad that needs to run in the paper for the next hearing. And that would be about, instead of a 20% increase, it's about an 8% increase over rollback. It's a 3% increase over the current millage rate, but an 8% increase over rollback, which is what we would advertise. So hopefully that's some sort of a path to get us through tonight and get where we need to end tonight is with a millage rate, so we can run the ad in the newspaper for the public hearing, and it's a big ad. It's a big ad in the Sentinel that will advertise a tax increase unless you go to rollback. So wherever we set it, it will, for those that are still reading the newspaper, it will be prominent. Even it's in the digital as well as art. So
and like I asked on the phone earlier in our conversation, we can't increase it, but we can decrease it after that, correct?
Right. So whatever you set tonight, you cannot go, all right, technically you can go up, but there's a lot of pain involved in that. So let's just say for all intents and purposes, you can go down, you can't go back up. So if there's something you want us, you know, me or Jerry or someone to look at in the next 2 weeks, we can do that, but at the next meeting, that's when you would actually have to set the final millage.
Tara, can you, the rescue funds, that sort of makes my head hurt. So we get 8 million, we get
Almost,
this million.
yeah, so 8.8 million is what has been allotted.
So
We already received 4.4 about a week ago.
Okay, so we've got half of it. So you had 500,000 in here.
Yeah, but again, that's an option to,
So is all the other money already been plugged into here from the rescue?
No.
fund? So where's that money?
so that money is deferred at this point until you decide how you want to spend it. It's in a bank account earning interest and it's considered deferred. So that's another,
So if you plug that 8.8 million in here, then we're flush.
yes, but not all of the 8.8 million
Right.
comes without strings.
Right, but so how much of it comes without, how much of it do we have freedom with?
A couple of million. I don't have a couple of million. It's really, the money that you have freedom with, that you don't have to draw a connection, is the money that was revenue lost during that year. So it's a
Right.
couple million.
And
The
then-
remainder, you'd have to draw a connection and submit it to the governor's office and say, this is how we'd like to use it. And it can be anything, related to COVID. So anything, if you wanted to buy purifiers for your air conditioning units or filters for the city hall, so anything related to COVID.
Which is, you could, I imagine, get pretty creative on that.
It can be electronic equipment, IT equipment for telework. It can be, as long as you can draw that connection.
It'd be firefighters.
So adding, that you are allowed to add new personnel, but they're very specific about it. You wouldn't be able to pay for pension.
Right.
I don't think we could show necessarily a COVID impact to the fire department, but we could make a,
Given
Scenario.
Given our governor's love affair with firefighters union.
I mean,
Um,
certainly you could make a case and see if they approved it.
Yeah. So, in other words, it's both ways, the money, the couple million that we're getting with few strings attached, and the remaining that we'll have to be creative with, but can fill needs. We're in a pretty solid situation here.
Right, so if you end up spending the 500,000 to fund the rest of the CIP, then the other 3.9 is still sitting in deferred revenue.
And that 3.9, is that part of the no strings attached, or
Some of it, yeah.
Some of it. Okay.
And again, it's one-time money, there's no, it's not going to
Right.
continue, it expires in '24.
So CIP is a good thing to spend that on.
Yes, I mean, it matches up with one-time revenue, one-time expenditure.
Anybody else have any questions? Sharon? Is that it, Sharon? Is that?
That's what I had, unless there are questions.
So the 4.49 mils, that would, all that does really just mean that we're not taking anything out of fund balance, right?
Yeah, it means you're not using the rescue funds,
Right.
so you leave that 4.4 untouched.
And nothing out of fund balance either, right?
Well, technically, the CRA money, when it comes back, comes into fund balance because it goes from restricted to unrestricted, but I'm trying to not make Jerry's head explode, so it comes out of fund balance, but it's not going to decrease any of your designations that you have.
But it doesn't change, you didn't give us that number to change the budget at all. The budget is the same.
Yeah, so it's 1.1 million from the CRA.
Okay. And you mentioned the use of the American Rescue Fund, and you implied that you have to get pre-approval from the governor's office to use that money?
Well, typically, they haven't rolled out all of the process, but typically with FEMA or any of those organizations, we like for them to say yes before, because there's all sorts of Buy American, you know what I mean? There's all sorts of requirements. So we'd like to at least get the blessing from the project manager that yes, this does qualify. Because if you spend the money and then it doesn't, it creates an issue. So they can't add additional strings to it. That's my understanding, is whatever the federal government has applied as strings, which is not a lot, except for those normal ones, The state cannot add additional, but we are the sub-grantee to the state, unlike Orlando and the larger cities that got the money directly. So it does put a administrative oversight from the governor's office.
Okay. Well, since this is a public hearing, let's open it up to the public. If anybody would like to address the council on this issue, please come to the podium and have that.
Dale McDonald, 108 Tangelo Court. Just for clarification, my little bee brain. So CIP items can be changed in one form or another in one meeting and 3 affirmative votes. Am I correct, Cliff?
Yes.
So doing that, and getting ourselves to balance here. Out of curiosity, you all said a trim rate, I believe at 5, which I dearly love. How many complaints have we got? I'm just curious. I haven't gotten any. Of course, I wouldn't get any now. But I'm just curious if the community, Sharon, if you or Mark have received a whole lot of "we know where you live" emails, kind of thing. Or has this been, as our experience has been in the past, in setting trim rates at 5, that it was sort of a non-event? So that was my question here. I realize that this is going to be perceived as an increase. We have a level of service expectation here, and a willing to pay level here. We don't get it both ways. And so being able to think about whether the fire department needing plenty of new folks, we ask ourselves with population increases, with ALF, out of the ordinary call increases. Again, I don't have as many details as you folks do, but these things make some sense, and we haven't even opened one of the ALFs yet. But we already know that the limited income over 55 project has already generated a disproportionate number of calls. We know that. And so taking some of this into account, I'm a big fan. You'll never have me tell Dave or Will no. And so to me, public safety, in public works, and everything else is great. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. Anybody else? Yes.
I'm Larry Scotchy, 70 Loudon Court. This has been passed out before? I mean, the millage rates, this is not the first time this was put in the mail? Because this is the first time I've seen this. You asked, why is, I haven't heard citizenry about the 20% increase. It caught my attention, I saw that you might pay, but I would read these things. And I was really surprised about the increase. And has this been out before? Maybe I missed the first time it came out.
No, this is it.
This is it?
Yeah, that's sent by the county property tax collector.
Yeah, so I looked over and I saw there's a meeting tonight, and so I can write a letter in and raise a fuss about the huge increase. So that's why I'm here. Okay, so this is the first time, and so I take it the CIP increase, the programs, is due to hiring more personnel. Is that the main reason for the increase?
if you could just ask us several questions, and we'll try and get to them after, because I think your time is running here. But so, in answer to your question, CIP really is just for capital programs, not personnel.
It's like sidewalks, road paving.
Yeah, it's the hard stuff, not the easy stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
No, please, I don't mean to cut you off. If you have other questions, please ask. We're here to.
Well, I guess all those numbers went over my head, and I was trying to figure out where is the 20% going? You know, is it for new personnel? Is it for sidewalks? Is it for roads or what? So,
Well, I think the short answer to your question, I don't want to take a little of your time here, was just because it might help, but in the budget that was drafted and sent out, there was a lot of personnel increases that perhaps we would need with fire, police, and grounds and other. They're not in the, that's not, I think that's been stripped out of what Sharon is telling us. And we're going really with just a lower, a budget that would meet the current tax rate more or less.
so that's not included in the 5 mil rate.
The 5 mil was back when that was passed. That's just a number kind of plucked out of the air that we could lower later. And so that is not by any means what you're going to pay. That's we're going to set the rate tonight. So that was just the number that was kind of the most it could possibly be, and now we're going to come down from that probably.
Yeah.
So,
And then whatever we set tonight, we can't go up, we can come down, but we can't go up.
so stay tuned.
Yeah.
Yeah, I caught that.
Yeah, so we'll do.
Okay, well, thank you for running with me.
Yes, you're welcome. Thanks for.
Mr. Scott, Mr. Scotchy, are you the proud father of Edgewater Eagle named Mike Scotchy?
Yeah, matter of fact.
There you go.
Mike and Dave and Larry. And
David Scott was in my year.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
The Eagles.
So I'm just going to do a quick recap of where we are, just so that everybody's on the same page. So yes, we sent out that trim notice. We voted on that 2 weeks ago, I guess, 3 weeks ago, whenever the last meeting was.
July.
Oh, gosh, it's been a while. All right, where am I? September. And, you know, this is kind of a long process. We kind of set the rate in a series of meetings. And even tonight, we're setting a rate. We're going to publish a rate, but this is not the final. We have on September 27th, the final. So we're getting there slowly and alarmingly, perhaps, if you just saw the trim notice. Historically, what Maitland has done is set that first notice pretty high at a rate that would accommodate, you know, kind of a lot of budget wishes rather than budget needs necessarily. And then we work with Sharon and Jerry Gray to kind of fine tune the budget and see what we can live with, what we can't live with, and whether we really need to raise the tax rate. So we set that number at 5 tonight. We may end up at 5, we may end up higher, we probably will end up lower, is my feeling. And then again on September 27th is the real actual meeting when we're going to set taxes that you'll actually have to pay. So this is kind of a long and torturous process that is required by the statutes of Florida. So we're really just requiring the schedule that they've built in by statute how to do this. All right. So, is there any further discussion about this? It looks like the rescue funds, is a kind of a TBD issue. I mean, we're going to end up with, $4 million more or less unrestricted, which could be used for a lot of the capital improvement projects, probably, if we wanted to swap them out and, move over to other things. But I think, I was talking to Mr. Regan earlier about this today, it might behoove us to have another, since this is an unusual year because we had to do it without Sharon. We really can't do it without Sharon. It's a better process with Sharon involved. So perhaps we could have a workshop or two to continue to fine tune the budget. As Dale pointed out, I mean, all it takes to change the CIP is 3 votes in a meeting. So it's not, even though we're setting it by an ordinance today, that really is just kind of a pro forma thing we're going to go through. state.
My thoughts, John, for
Yeah.
tonight would be to, since there's some question over the rescue fund money, we, for this purpose, because we can't go up from here, we would sort of advertise, go with the 44937, which balances this without the application of those funds, and then be able to, in the coming weeks, decide how to potentially use those federal funds, or do we want to save them and apply them to a bigger project or fund more initiatives that the city has been looking at in years in the past, and maybe accelerate some projects. But I think for tonight's purposes, I would go with what balances the budget without the use of that money until we fully understand it. That's my.
Okay, so and just for that, the 4.4937 mils is, Sharon, you went over it kind of fast for me. It looked like it was an actual increase of 3.3%, but it would be
Yeah.
a 7.8% increase over
Yeah.
the rollback rate?
Yeah, so it is, the rollback millage is 4.1693, so it is a 7.78% over rollback. The debt millage did come down a little bit since the budget draft, just because there's cash in there, we were able to reduce it a little bit. But yeah, over math-wise, it's 3.3. Trim-wise, it's 7.78. So what would go in the newspaper ad is the 7.78.
Which I always think is unfortunate, the way that gets published.
Well, I would probably vote to stand pat where we are, because if you look at, we know we've got several million in federal funds that are going to be available. That's not going to be in doubt. So we've got 2, 3, 4 million that's guaranteed in the bank, and so we don't have to wonder where that, it's the other half, 4 point whatever million that we have to jump through hoops. But even with the amount that's guaranteed, we are more than flush on our budget, and in fact, probably the flushest we've been since I've been here. So it's just hard for me to advertise an 8% increase when we don't. There's really no budgetary need when you go through those numbers. I mean, we had a 500,000 in red, and we got 4 million in the bank. So I don't see the.
I guess my question is, if we're going to come back and visit it, and we're looking, we're saying to fund this, and I think we were looking at 4.49, right? And we can go down, but we can't go up. Should we give ourselves just a little bit of, room to, in case, we need it in a couple weeks, we see, an item that maybe we want to fund or whatever it is. But like I said, once we set it, we can't go back up. I don't care if we drop it all. I mean, if we drop it all the way back down to 4.3, whatever, we probably won't, but I'm just saying I'd rather have that number a little higher and then drop it at the end.
It's just so I'm clear, Mike, Thomas, when you said we should stand pat, did you mean that we should go with our current millage rate, or do we stand pat at 5.0?
No, you know me better than that.
All right.
The current millage rate.
So if you stand pat though, just so we're clear, when you stand pat based on what we were last year, and I keep wanting to scroll, I keep wanting to touch that screen.
Yeah, I did that too.
Where do you want to go?
But so if you were to stay at where the current millage rate is what, 4.3 something?
4.345.
So if you stay at that number, it's still going to show an increase over rollback. It's not like staying pat. So what are we at? Just plug in what we're at now, and then show us what that increase looks like. It's still going to show a 4.22 increase. So what we're talking about tonight is advertising either something that shows a 4.22% increase or a 7.8 increase.
And the 7.8 pays for two police officers that we theoretically already need to have.
I'm just, from an optics standpoint, I don't know that that's a significant difference. It is, I mean, all money is money and percentage points are percentage points. But I think from getting us to the next meeting, I mean, if we're confident, fully confident that that $500,000 comes out of the management rescue plan, it can go without hesitation to what we might want to do, we wouldn't have to necessarily sacrifice something else that's been put in the budget, then that's fine. And I think, but we can, I think maybe to what John was saying, we can figure that out over the next couple weeks. But it's not like, I just wanted to clarify, it's not like by setting it at 4.53, we're not going to show a quote unquote tax increase on a paper, which is why I think it's sort of misleading, not misleading, but I hate the way it's really not an increase from last year, but it's going to show as an increase over rollback. So it's a.
I think from the same perspective, and you make an excellent point, that it's not going to be a net zero increase, and so there is some number there. So it's not zero, so we're not going to be able to go backwards. But I also think from the perspective of justifying to our residents that if we keep the same budget where we're not doing anything this year over last year, what are we actually doing up here? Because we're supposed to be trying to grow the city. And growing the city requires infrastructure, growing the city requires spending money on things. And unfortunately, in order to, as a reflection of the fact that our city is getting bigger, that is a reflection of a larger budget. And a larger budget, unfortunately, in some cases means we have to make small increases to our tax base in order to pay for these increases to grow our city. So while 19 point whatever percent is a huge number and certainly is going to put some people off, I think my 7% seems much more reasonable, but it also, we have to continue to grow the city, and if we keep our budget flatlined, are we really doing the best thing for the city when we may need to make an increase in a year or two? We say, oh, well, we didn't raise our millage rate last year, we didn't raise it the year before, why would we raise it now? We're going backwards at that point. Remember inflation, the numbers, no matter what we're spending, the numbers are getting smaller, not bigger. So at this point, I think we have to do something to move our city forward, and unfortunately, does that mean raising our taxes? Yes, but does that mean that we're also providing a better quality of life for our residents, and we're paying for things that need to get done to keep the city operating and growing? Absolutely.
So I can share this with you. A year and a half ago when I was out campaigning, which I think is the greatest thing ever in the world because you really get to meet people. Things that they wanted is more police, more fire. They wanted more of those services. And so,
They're not free.
I just talked to somebody the other day that wanted an employee down at Fort Maitland. So they want the services, that's for sure.
I'm just a little, because it seems we've already determined we can meet everything they're talking about. There isn't anything that we're meeting the CIP budget, we're hiring the 2 additional police officers, we're doing all that by keeping it at the current rate, so I'm not sure what we're shortchanging here.
Sharon, my question is, and this might be just, I might be totally off on this. If we use that $8 million to fund this year, next year, would that put us in a big deficit since we don't have that, or am I just thinking wrong?
You're talking about if you use 500,000 of the 8 million, it's not.
No, not that, but if we use 4 million of that 8 million, would that put us in a big hole for next year?
You wouldn't need to. I mean, our budget isn't that big. So,
right.
Yeah, that's why it only shows the 500,000 because the other 3.9 is going to remain unspent. It can either move projects up. I mean, as we have more discussions and we have that funding, we can move projects up that are already in the CIP, designate them for other ones, but it technically should be one-time expenditures. You're not going to see that money again, okay. I would assume, for a while.
And it has to be spent by 24?
24. So, yeah, you definitely don't want to sit on it either because
right.
the projects take a while.
So what I'm thinking, and just for purposes of tonight and the discussion, is that because I think there's still, I think John, you made a good point, that we've got maybe some thinking to do on this, is that we look at, because that money is now a reality of that American Rescue Fund's money, there may be things that we could do that are in the CIP that are out years that we could move forward, spend the money now, and actually the budget impacts will be to the positive. And we might actually look at this and say, we had a lot of things budgeted in the CIP in 2024 or 5 or 6 or whatever, and we can maybe accelerate some of those projects, use some of the American Rescue Funds for that, and then we actually improve the budget outlook on the go forward. And then also, we are taking 1.2, 1.1 from CRA.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that looks like on the go forward, but we may be improving ourselves by not
The CRA is paying back 1.8
every year.
million this year. 800,000 is going for Independence Lane North that we talked about in a different fund, and then 1.1 million, so it's almost 1.9.
But we've also talked about
That's it.
things, and we've also talked about things that could potentially, we've talked about.
You can use it in the CRA. if you
Right,
want.
we've talked
Yeah.
about the use of that money within the CRA and the potential needs. So-
You have a lot of, if you use it within the CRA, it still pays off back the general fund later.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think we're just, between now and a couple weeks, we're giving ourselves some options. If we keep it at the 44937, that was what it was. And that's not to say that we stay there in 3 weeks, because I think Mike makes good points, is that you've got to justify, you can't just say we're sitting on money that's earning no money, just for the good of no money. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if you lay out a vision of how this is what we're going to plan to do with that money over the next 4 years, here are these capital improvement programs that we have as a 5-year CIP, and we're going to step up some of these projects that people in the city, like we've all talked to, say they'd love to see. So that's my thought.
I agree with you on that, Mike.
Sharon, just one more quick question to, Commissioner Law Harrison's question. That include 2 police, but not the fire, correct?
Right, so on the other recommendations, there's still recommendations, they still need to be discussed. I just think that you want to spend some time actually talking about the long-term implications of those, and if you all want to add them, and how you want to do that. None of them are urgent, they were all mid-year adds anyways, but I think there's a lot more discussion specifically with the fire and.
That's the key.
Any of the,
Yes.
on fire, or any of those positions that we need to fill with fire, or is that's just general employees of the city?
So, of the recommendations?
I mean, right now, you said we have positions we need to fill.
Oh, we always have I'm assuming we have an opening. in
Always
fire.
get 1
Yeah.
or 2 here or there?
Yeah.
Okay, is there any further discussion? If not, there 3 motions we have to walk through here in order to get this done. Sharon can help us with the numbers.
So the first one is going to be where you want to set the general funds operating millage.
All right, I'll make the motion and see if I don't screw it up. Move to adopt the tentative operating millage rate for the 2021 tax year as 4.4937, which is 7.78% above the rollback rate of 4.1693.
Perfect.
Well done.
Should we just marvel that a while, or do you
Yeah.
want someone to second?
I'll second that.
All right, a motion and a second. Maria?
Councilmember Guthrie,
Aye.
Councilmember Hall Harrison,
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas,
Aye.
Councilmember Wild,
Aye.
Mayor Lyons.
Aye. All right,
Okay. Move to adopt the tentative voted debt millage rate for the 2021 year as 0.2370 for a combined total millage rate of 4.7307.
Perfect.
Good.
good, Matt.
Man, she's good. Still impressed.
All right, we have a motion.
I'll second again.
All right. Motion and second, Maria.
Councilmember Paul Harrison.
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas.
Aye.
Councilmember Wild.
Aye.
Councilmember Guthrie.
Aye.
Mayor Lance.
Aye.
Move to adopt the tentative budget for the general fund in the amount of $30,516,600.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second, Maria.
Councilmember Thomas.
Aye.
Councilmember Wild.
Aye.
Councilmember Guthrie.
Aye.
Councilmember Paul Harrison.
Aye.
Mayor Lance.
Aye. Okay, we got that one done. And just for Mr. Scotchy and everybody else's purposes, that we're getting there. It came down from 5.0 to 4.49 tonight, and you might see another drop by the 27th. But thank you for your input. All right, let's have a short recess. About personnel. And thank you, Karen, for walking through that and guiding us through that and having the numbers ready when we're needed.
Are you going to stick around? Mark? Are you going to stick
Wheels.
Need some help?
Oh, look at this. Thank you. I hurt my arm.
That's me. Wow, that was it.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, if you gotta do something, you go all the way. You have 2 new apples. I don't want to make it
Do you work out today?
tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Yeah, no, I did today.
Tuesday, Thursday?
Yeah. I'm gonna go down the road.
Down the ramp?
Yeah.
How many years is it going to be?
That's your chair. That's your cockpit. But I do appreciate it.
This really makes it seem like we weren't in Cape
None taken. None taken.
Sharon when we could, but now we're back to Mark Reagan.
Thank you.
All fairness, Mark's been doing an amazing job, and we have a deep bench at the moment, so we're doing good now. Let's see, we are back at the city manager, assistant city manager. Any old business to report?
No, sir.
Okay. Let's see. Now is the consent agenda. Does anybody on council wish to remove any items from the consent agenda? Going once, going twice, none. All right, is there any public comments on consent agenda item number 2? Anybody from the public like to discuss consent agenda item number 2? Going. All
Make a
right.
motion to approve the consent agenda.
All right.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Maria?
Councilmember Wild,
Aye.
Councilmember Guthrie,
Aye.
Councilmember Paul Harrison.
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas,
Aye.
Mayor Glenn.
Aye. Okay, now is the time for public period where anybody who would like to speak to the council and public at large about any item that's actually not on the agenda, please come forward to the podium.
Hello, I'm Stacy Larson, the director of the Maitland Public Library, and September is National Library Card Sign-Up Month. So I just want to take an opportunity to encourage everyone to get their library card and or to verify that your library card is still active and renew it if it's not. We do offer free library cards, of course, to every resident of Maitland, which includes all of y'all. We also offer free library card membership to every city employee, as well as every teacher in every school in the city of Maitland. Not all Orange County, but just everybody in Maitland. So you can come to the library to show us your teacher ID or your city ID. I believe there are actually library card applications in the onboarding packet for employees as well. So I invite everybody to come take advantage of the opportunity to get a library card and participate in the National Library Card Sign-Up. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Anybody else like to
Trying to
resist?
resist the urge. Go ahead.
All right. Public period is closed. All right, gentlemen, we're moving on to decision for the evening. We have an ordinance, capital improvement program 2022 to 2026. Maria, could you read the title?
An ordinance to amend ordinance number 1381 in direct relations to the capital improvement program, table 1, amending the governance and implementation element of the Maitland Comprehensive Development Plan 235 to replace table 7.1 capital improvement program to recognize the annual update of the City of Maitland 5-year CIP, amending CDP relating to Orange County Public Schools, and to recognize the annual update of the Orange County Public Schools 10-year capital outlay plan, and provide an effective date.
Okay. Thank you. Mark, could you introduce this item for us?
Sure. This item is primarily ministerial in its nature. What the Comprehensive Planning Act requires for every city in the state of Florida is that you have a funded 5-year capital improvements program to address items that require level of service. What this does is change out last year's table 7.1 with the new table 7.1, which is the capital improvements program, 5-year capital improvements program. So basically what we just went over, as Sharon said, without the Mohegan sidewalk, which we are funding out of this year's budget.
Okay. Somebody have any questions or more? Well, it's kind of ministerial. It is a nice exercise because you get to pull it out and look at it as we go through the year. Would any member of the public like to comment on this item? Seeing none, let's close the public period. And if there's any more discussion, if not, then a motion would be in order.
Move the ordinance.
All right.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Ray, can you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Guthrie,
Aye.
Councilmember Hall Harrison,
Aye.
Councilmember Thomas,
Aye.
Councilmember Wild,
Aye.
Mayor Lyons.
Aye. Good. Next item is a discussion item about the Thurston House. And Mark, can you introduce that item and walk us through it?
Absolutely. As you recall, at your last meeting, I went over history of how we got to this point in time, back from the early 90s to now. I don't plan on going through that again. I gave you sort of a bullet point rundown on that in your staff report. If you have any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer them. But at your August 23rd meeting, several issues arose regarding the lease, and I sort of, after looking at my notes and listening to the meeting again, sort of broke down to 6 categories. The first, that we should consider other uses of the property. One of the examples that was given, actually the only example that was given, was in the front center, potentially. The city should examine selling the property. That the rent was perceived to be below market rate. You wanted a breakdown of the cost of maintenance to the city for the exterior of the structure. As far as the lease renewal, it's a 10-year lease broken into 5-year sections with the option for the tenant. We discussed that option be at the city's discretion, not the tenant's. And there were some concerns that there was no guarantees that the tenants would use the property as a bed and breakfast. To bring us up to speed where we are today, based upon that discussion, the prospective tenants that were going to buy the business from the Ballards have backed out. The Ballards still desire to continue to market the business, to allow prospective tenants to enter into a lease agreement with the city. So based upon that desire, staff's requesting some direction regarding how discussions will go with future tenants in the form of what a new lease might take. So I'll try to address the 6 points specifically in terms of how we move forward. The first is the use issue, and in terms of use, we have to discuss a little bit about zoning and land use. The property is zoned RS2, which is our single-family residential district. Allows for single-family dwellings and your typical accessory uses, garages, pools, things like that. The previous comprehensive plan allowed bed and breakfasts as permitted conditional uses. The Ballards went through the process. Actually, the Ballards requested a comprehensive plan amendment to have bed and breakfast included in the comp plan, and used that language that they spearheaded, that was adopted by the city council, to be approved for a permitted conditional use to allow the bed and breakfast on the Thurston House property. The current comprehensive plan and land development code does not specifically address B&Bs, so this sort of renders the use a legally non-conforming use. That status allows for the bed and breakfast to remain and continue operation in its current use, provided it doesn't cease operation for 180 days. Additionally, non-conforming uses can't be expanded or intensified. So that's the basic criteria for those types of uses. This sort of relates to the discussion of changing uses. Specifically, again, if there's any other uses, I can try to address them. But we talked about an event center. First, an event center is a more intense use, which wouldn't be allowed under the zoning, because basically anybody here that has a single-family home, you wouldn't want an event center next to you, so the zoning code wouldn't allow for an event center to go in. And if you wanted a different use, you would need to change the land use and zoning there, which you have the ability to do. You can administratively change that. You have to go through the process, do the advertising. So if you wanted a use beyond the current bed and breakfast or a single-family residence, you would have to amend the land use and zoning. There's an additional level of discussion when it comes to the Thurston House, particularly if you're going to change the use of a property. So in addition to the zoning issues, the property is also designated one of our heritage lands, which is fairly unique to the city of Maitland. So under this designation, any change in the use of property would require a referendum by the voters. So here again, using the only example that came up, if you're going to change it from a single-family home / bed and breakfast to a event center, not only would you have to address the zoning and land use issues, you would also have to have a referendum and have that approved by the residents of the city. Heritage Lands also addresses sale of property too. There was some talk about sale of the property. If you wanted to sell the property, that would also have to go to a referendum of the voters, which did happen in the 90s, and that sale was rejected by the voters. So that sort of gives you an idea of where we stand in terms of the use of the property. The lease on the property is $1,700, a little over $1,700 a month. This yields approximately $18,000 to the city annually. According to the lease, the rent is increased by the CPI, and this is the formula we've used for the last 30 years. If the city council believes that the rent is below market rate for a B&B, we would request some direction as to where you feel the market would be. I'm not sure where that would come from, how that number would come up, but you just have to remember that from a perspective, you're not just renting a place for somebody to stay, you're renting it with the condition it has to be in B&B, and there are maintenance requirements for the tenant. So if you would rent an apartment, you wouldn't be required to maintain the interior of the structure, where under this lease agreement, the tenants are required to, among other things, maintain the interior of the structure. From a maintenance perspective, the tenant is required to maintain the interior of the structure and the grounds, the little over acre that the house sits on. The city maintains the exterior. So I asked Kim in the Public Works Department how much we spend annually on the property for that exterior maintenance piece of it. So she pulled the money from the schedules for the last 3 years, and we've averaged about $8,400 a year on exterior maintenance. That's materials and labor. I asked Jerry to pull what we've spent in materials for the last 20 years. We have those records. We don't have the labor costs for those, but we haven't tracked those except for the last couple of years. But for the last couple of years, or for the last 20 years, we spent an average of $2,800 on materials. So to give you an idea of how much we're putting into maintenance on the structure, those are those numbers. The other issue that was discussed was the lease renewal options. The proposed lease has a 10-year term with an option for the tenant to renew for the second 5 years, so 5 and 5 at the tenant's option. There's currently 2.5 years left on the lease. What was discussed at the meeting on the 23rd was that the city council would have the second renewal at the city's option versus the tenant's option. In case we decided there was a better use of the site within that first 5 years, then we could give the tenants notice that we're going to change the use of the site and give us a little more flexibility, which was one of the concerns of the new potential B&B owners, our potential tenants. Their concerns were that having a 5-year window to recoup their cost wasn't long enough to recoup their investment, and secondly, they were concerned that if you were to change the use, they'd be left without a business. They would have invested in purchasing the business from the Ballards and without a place to stay. So as they weighed that, they determined that they didn't want to go forward. So if you want to change the term or the renewal options, we'll need some direction on that too, and how you'd like that to be flushed out. The last issue was the guarantee of use. And that was that there was some concern about assurances that the house would continue to be used as a B&B. The current language in the lease states that, and this is under the termination clauses, that the lease can be terminated if the tenants fail to open for business and operate a bed and breakfast homestay, catering to the general public for any continuous 60-day period during the term of the lease. That, coupled with the fact that we require that all licenses be and inspections be kept up, and that they provide those to us as we need, was the language that provided that guarantee in the lease, at least for the last 30 years. So if we'd like some more robust language, we'd have to discuss the nature of that language and how we would determine that. So there's basically three questions that we would like some direction on tonight. The first is, does the council want to allow the continued use of property as a bed and breakfast? And if so, under what terms? Specifically to what I've just discussed. If the city doesn't want to continue the use, we would like to request some direction on what the options for proposed use are so we could lay out a path to get you to the desired use of the property. So, and if the direction is to proceed with the lease, we would request direction regarding specific changes that the council would like to see in the lease, so any prospective tenants would know what they were getting into before they would approach city council again. As the mayor and I discussed earlier, one of the sections of the charter requires that a lease of a property be adopted by ordinance. So they would have to come back to you for 2 readings. So they would just like to know what the lay of the land is from a council perspective before they would, if there's another purchaser for the business out there, what they could expect when they reapproach council on first reading of that ordinance. So if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer those.
Okay, does anybody have any questions, Mark? Well, so I guess the first question we need to grapple with is, do we like the idea of this property being used as a B&B? And I would say that I would say yes. It's a unique piece of property. It's a unique situation. I mean, because of the heritage land restrictions and because of the location of the property, and because of the asset that's on the property. So it has found its way to a use largely through the efforts of Joe and Carol Ballard, who kind of pushed it and took a risk and made it work. And I think it's been working out there for 30 years. And I think, as I noted last time, that the people who come through the B&B are impressed not only with that operation, but I think they are. It kind of acts as an ambassador for Maitland generally. I think that they like the house, they like the area. Joe and Carol send them off to go spend their money in Maitland or in Winter Park, mostly in Maitland, I hope. But it really is. It has found this use because there's really nothing else that anybody else has come up with. It's not just like having a piece of an acre of raw land somewhere that you can turn into a park, or you can do whatever you want with it. It has a beautiful house on it, and which is would be difficult to turn to any other use. Whether that would be public buildings or the new home for Parks and Rec. It lends itself to the B&B operation, and the uses are restricted. We don't have any other good use for it. And if we wanted to knock it down and turn it into a park, it is. You would have, I think, some backlash perhaps from the local residents, but what be that as it may, it's not particularly well suited or well placed for access for people from Maitland. So I'm not sure that's a good use for it. As to the event center, the increased intensity of use there is a problem, I think, and there are you have to increase the traffic, it would increase the parking, it would increase the just the density and the use of that piece. And again, not to minimize the effects on the neighborhood property. So that said, if we think that it's a good use, we also have to think that we have to be somewhat flexible in getting people in there. If we want to do this, we have to be flexible in getting there because, as we saw from the couple that was earlier interested in this operation, 5 years is not a long time to recoup their investment. In 5 years from what they perceive to be kind of city micromanagement and then out on their ear in 5 years. It's just not, it's not the kind of thing that's going to draw people. I think we're going to have to be a better partner. And I think we've been lucky with the Mountains so far, in the sense that, you know, they have put their shoulders to the wheel and make it work, and they trusted us, we trusted them. They don't, you know, we never hear about it here at the council because they're dealing with Sharon and Mark and Public Works and going quietly about the business. So I, you know, if we do want this to be a B&B, again, I would suggest we have not to make this lease too onerous, because we're going to find ourselves without anybody there, and I think the last thing we want is for a vacant piece of property out there to become a, you know, attractive nuisance, and to have police and fire routinely going out there and, you know, trying to preserve the property.
So John, I would say here, or do you have more?
No, that was my submission.
So if you were, I hear you, and if we were to agree, I think the threshold question is, do we want to keep it as a B&B? If the answer to that is yes, I would think one of the ways we could do this, and just throwing this out there for discussion, so we don't have to, so they don't have to keep coming back, is I was thinking we could just structure this as amend their lease now, and allow them to assign it with permission of the city manager, so it doesn't have to go through. I don't know if we can do that, Cliff. We can. So my thought process is here: you give them, they have 2.5 years left on their lease. We amend the lease to grant them. Are they in any options? Are they out of options?
That I can tell you.
Where is it, Mark? Where's the current lease stand as far as there's 2.5 years left? Do they have options after that?
No, that's what
Okay. All right. So I would suggest that we amend their lease. There's some things we could use to clean up in the lease in and of itself. So either we amend and restate it, or amend it by some other means. But give them the 2.5 years that they've got. Give them a 5-year option at their discretion. So it would be a 7.5 years from now. We keep the terms fairly much the same as the way they stand, cleaning up some of the issues that are there, and then that would give them the certainty now and allow them to potentially act a little bit quicker with giving the permission to assign through city manager to approve the assignment, so that they wouldn't have to go through a public hearing process. They'd have a lease done, there'd be certainty of that, and we would have I think, an easier mechanism for them to be able to sell their business. And then I would also suggest that, you know, due to the closure of it, that we do something with the rent for September and until they can get a new operator in. So those would be my suggestions on this, and then it would give city council the ability. I feel like now we're kind of, this decision was sort of put on us, rushed a little bit, if you will. We didn't see it coming, and that would give us ample time in that 7.5-year period to start thinking about this. And if it's going to be the idea is it's a bed and breakfast, well then 5 years from now, with 2.5 years left, we can grant another option and amend the lease to do that. So that would be my thought.
That is a creative thought. I think that's a good, I mean, you're saying that we would delegate to the city manager the authority to
approve the assignment. So essentially, they wouldn't have to come back through, and so if they found a prospective buyer, you wouldn't have to go through a public hearing process and then wait what could be 6 weeks or so, and then time kill deals. And so we would get out of that having to come through a public hearing process. And if we do the lease amendment, and if the lease amendment has to be approved by city council, we get that done. But the lease is amended, ready to go to be assigned to successor purchaser of the business. That's my thought.
Okay. If I understand them, I think I did. There's no more options. So we're talking about a new ordinance, first reading, second reading, before you could do an extension, because essentially it's a new lease. So as long as you understand the timetable.
Understood, but we would do that without having to then have to find a buyer and then do that process. I'm saying we proactively give them that with the ability of so it's only 2.5 years, so we're not going to amend it to add any term that they don't want. we give them the option to extend it should they find another buyer, right? They don't want to extend it now if they can't find any buyer. So we give them the option to extend it, and then we give city manager the authority to approve the assignment and not go through city council. That's the problem. Is that logic?
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a good idea, I'm just saying.
No, it's logical, just understanding that any kind of extension of the lease at this point is gonna require an ordinance. So it's not gonna happen like with a snap of a finger.
Understood. But it's quicker than putting them through, finding a buyer, and then having to see if the buyer has to come here and watch us debate this again.
Well, what it also means is that given what I think, if I understood happened the last go-round, that unless there's something that's going to address the elephant in the room of how long will the lease be if I'm a potential buyer, where they gotta get in and go back through the process, it won't hold them up from being able to list it, but the same question's gonna come up again. Like, how long will I, if I have this business, how long will I have it? So the debate is being pushed down the road, it's not being resolved. Do you understand?
Well, the debate is allowing us to have the debate in an informed fashion and not feel like we're holding up a deal or trying to make this a more painful process.
But again, if I understand correctly, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, they were out in the market said, how long? And then he couldn't answer, and when they got the answer, that didn't work. So until the question of how long is it going to be available for someone to buy, they're going to have a problem, I think, the same problem we had before. That's what I gather.
I'm trying to solve that problem in, say, 7.5 years. If we don't think that's enough, then someone tell me, but that was the thought.
I don't think that's enough.
Not really.
I was swinging the other way, that we need to give a longer term, obviously giving whoever it is who comes in to assume the lease the option to assign it themselves with, subject to city authority, but we need to extend this. We don't want to keep having this conversation, do we? Because if this comes up for renewal in 5 years or 7 years, here we are, they're gonna come back, we're gonna have the same conversation over again. What is the intended use of this property? Well, we've kind of, we've beat this horse so many times, and as Mark has shown us, this conversation just keeps coming back around. We've all heard about the fact that the minutes reflect that this literally has been discussed in 1991, in 1994, 2000. I mean, over
How
and
long would you
over.
propose?
15 years.
Okay. I'm not
Just
prepared.
get it over with. What else are we going to do with it?
It's a good question.
And I don't think there is something else. So if we have a performing asset in the city that is a piece of land that we can lock it down and we know that it's going to pay for itself over the long term, until that neighborhood itself turns into something different, we can't change the use of that land. So let's just lock it down and let the people do what they're going to do with it. Give them some certainty of what their business could turn into.
Okay.
Right.
Yes.
Going on Lindsay's thoughts, would this ability to assign a lease be a one-time thing, or can people keep assigning it when they start running into business issues and then maybe assign it to someone we don't want it assigned to?
I would think it would be just a one-time assignment from Joe and Carol to whoever their buyer is, and then
they're stuck with it, and then if they don't perform, out they go.
Right.
And is our mechanism for out they go rock solid? I mean, is there? I don't like the, was it 180 days? I think that's too long. What was the language on it that's not operated as a B&B?
That's the non-conforming use language, and if you take any non-conforming use that's lawful, and you stop making it that use for a period of 180 days uninterrupted, you lose the ability to continue that use.
180 days, 6. I mean,
Well,
why would
there's two sets of, there's the non-conforming use issue, but there's also 60-day limit.
Yeah, and there's
That's
nine different termination clauses within the lease, so.
The non-conformity is the same as we use in our downtown with the drive-throughs for 90 days.
to be honest, I've sell the house, but I'm not like vested in this. So, if we want to keep doing this, you know, the previous attempt that Mark referred to that was rejected by voters, it was rejected because the mayor at that time made a huge deal out of it, and oh my God, they're giving away our heritage and this and that, and that led to this whole, you know, hole we've gotten dug into. You know, if you ran Mark Bell said you wanted to get rid of surplus property and allocate the sales funds to our parks department, that would pass, you know, so, you know, we could do that, but I'm not gonna die on that hill. If we wanna keep trying as a B&B and hope that business survives in the new economy where people just rent their rooms and houses out, we can either way.
And look, I don't know what the right length is, and I'm by no means an expert in bed and breakfast leases, in business operations, but I do know a decent amount about retail and business stuff, and a 7.5-year term for what I understand this investment is going to be is not out of the ordinary. It's actually longer in many cases. I mean, I know a lot of 5-year deals where tenants put up a lot more cash to get the business going than what I'm hearing is the number here. I also know that, and I balance that with the ability to get out after 2.5 years is actually really attractive, because if someone gets in and says, wow, this is not what I want, it's actually attractive. So the alternative to what you're saying is you're locking somebody in, and I think the way it was structured before under this one, it was a 10-year deal, is that right?
5 and 5.
5 and 5. I mean, it's a different, 10 total. It's a different analysis. So I actually don't think 7.5 years based, but again, I'm not, and if someone's got an educated statement on that's too long because they know a whole lot about bed and breakfast operations, I'm happy to hear it. But I feel like we're all just kind of taking stabs at this one. And I think so my attempt was to say 2.5 years as an out, that's a pretty good deal. 7.5 years for a total term is not out of line with what I think market is for investment, initial investment on a getting a business going. And that gives everybody the ability to look at this. And if you're right, Lindsay, that this looks like this is the best use, well then 5 years from now, without this kind of immediate push, council can say, let's extend this. Let's give the current tenant who's been in there and it's been as great as the Bowers have been over the years. Let's give that tenant the option to extend. Without a lot of these questions being in, I'm trying to help them out. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give them the ability to not have to come in here and have us vet the new buyer and go through all this process. I'm trying to give them a short circuit around that. But I also am saying, let's not tie this up for so long without having the ability to vet all that. So I'm just trying to meet in the middle here.
And my thought in the 15 years is that we want to put this in a position where we're not having to continue to readdress this in a massively, evolutionary discussion every 5 years. So if that 7.5 years comes with an option for renewal, to give certainty to both parties that we don't have to keep having this conversation, I am definitely down for that. So, but again, I'm with you. I don't do this for a living. So if there is a professional opinion on where this lease should be, I would defer to the experts.
Well, let me just say, if you indulge me for a moment, I know this is a discussion item, but I think we have a couple experts in the room, and perhaps we can hear from Joe or Carol about the lease term, and yes, you just come up to either one, whatever you'd like to be. And I think if we could hear from you on the particular point of, from the business perspective, is 5 years long enough, is 10 years long enough, is 7.5 years long enough?
Carol Bell at 851 Lake Avenue. It's 7.5 is not going to attract anybody. The problem is it's a different kind of business. They're actually living there. So So they're giving up their home. The people that were going to purchase it had already taken an agreement on their house. They were moving there. They were changing their entire lives to purchase this business and live there. 7.5 years is not going to be attractive to somebody. It's going to be longer than that because it's a huge commitment. And it's not a type of business, it's more of a passion that you do it and a lifestyle than it is something that would make a ton of money. 7.5 years would not be attractive. We would not be able to sell it, the business. The city would be left with a big old empty house if that was the case. We own everything having to do with Thurston House. We own everything in the house. We own everything, the domain, the website, the software, the goodwill from 30 years. We own it all. If we were to have to be forced out and leave, the city has a big old empty house that's going to deteriorate. There's not going to be any income to pay for the electric that you'll have to keep on, and the water and things like that, and it would be a real shame. We have built a business over 30 years. We put $200,000 of our own money in. We trusted the city enough to enter into this agreement 30 years ago, put $200,000 into the city's building. Nobody else came up with that idea. We were the only ones that did that. And we opened for business. We've enjoyed people from 37 countries, every state, 6 territories. People love Maitland. They spend a lot of money in Maitland. And every time we go through this process, nobody can come up with a higher and better use. We've gone there every single time. And it's, if we could come up with something, that would be one thing. But
so 7.5 is not what is one?
a 10 with maybe another option for 5 more. And to continue, I mean, the people coming in after us could be really great and want to continue on and be us 30 years from now if the city still can't come up with an idea. When the city first bought the house, they tried to come up with an idea. It sat empty for 2 years before we came along. We're the only ones that came along and said, hey, we want to put $200,000 into your house. But we still had to go through 10 months of planning and zoning meetings. We didn't just get the house handed to us. We had to go through a lot of work to get that part of it done.
Okay. Well, thank you. Does everybody have a question?
Well, I will say this. Working for Hilton for 7 years, working for Park Plaza Gardens Resort in Tybee Island, Georgia for 3 years, I would say that I agree. I did get to visit the house, and I was able to ask about what their daily rates are, how much occupancy they do in a year, and I asked the question of, is this something that can survive just on itself? And these guys put a lot of love and effort into it. I mean, they continuously had worked through their life and did this. So for somebody to pick up and say, I'm going to go invest, $100,000. I'm going to buy the business and then invest another $100,000. I want some, security, and that's why I kind of think the 10-year myself. Now, that's if you guys want to go this direction. I mean, if you want to do something else, that's a whole different story. But I mean, when you're having right now, I think you said that you're only allowed to rent 2 rooms right now during the COVID time.
I chose to do that.
Oh, you chose to do that?
For safety, and blocked a couple days before and after each reservation again for safety. So we blocked a lot,
right,
especially last year and into this year just because of the COVID situation. So our income has not been what it normally would be.
Right. And if somebody's coming in, they're going to have to probably want to get new furniture. They're going to go out there. They're going to redo the yard and, do some changes and invest for their lifestyle, how they see it.
Right. The amount of money that they would pay us for the business, most of it is goodwill. Our goodwill over the year, probably 80% of this is goodwill.
Right.
But again, everything having to do with Thurston House. The furnishings is like this much. Everything else is the goodwill. We've had people that have stayed with us over 20 years and continue to stay with us. I have bookings already till, the Winter Park Art Festival. It's the same people every single year. I'm booked for Wellens graduation, Wellens family weekends. A lot of people visit their families in Maitland and stay with us. I mean, we are an asset to Maitland. People in Maitland do get to enjoy it because they have a place that they can put up their relatives, and they do.
Okay.
Obviously, he's passionate.
No,
It's a life,
I
it's a
know.
lifestyle for us.
It's unfair of me to try to stick you to one little point, but I think that'll help us get where we're going. Thank you.
Oh, she also put, yeah, 3 rooms, right?
I have 3 guest rooms.
3 rooms, guest rooms.
Okay. Well, 10 years sounds like a length of time, it's minimum time that we want to put in, so, with another option for 5. And Mike, Wild, I like that idea. I think, just so I understand it with Cliff, we would still have to go through this dance right now, this ordinance, to get it up and running. What we would set it up for would be an assignment for a term of whatever the, I guess, 7.5 plus 2.5.
Correct.
And then delegate to the city manager the authority to vet the parties that would get the assignment.
Correct.
And just so we're clear, they had a buyer that was on a 10-year term with a 5-year and a 5-year. So I don't,
I think the 5 years was at our option.
not the way that's what we talked about. I believe that in the lease that was proposed,
Is it their option?
it was 5 years with a 5-year renewal on somewhat notice. I don't think it gave the city the right to say no.
Right.
So essentially, it was a 10-year term.
It was, yeah, 5
It was
plus
6,
5.
they had 6 months notice to give us, and it was 5 and 5, and they had a buyer under those terms. So I certainly don't think we have to go beyond that. I was actually, literally, I thought I was actually helping them out a little bit.
Well, no, you were, I mean, because in the 2.5 years, we'd have to get this again. No, otherwise, I'm saying otherwise. If we were to go, unless we just do a brand new lease with the new people coming in, we're gonna have to go through this.
Yeah, so what I was trying to also just get to a point where they wouldn't have to come back, and I think that the question becomes, are we willing to give them a 10-year lease and allow them to assign it without coming back to a public hearing? I was trying to find a middle ground here to make this,
Well, to get to your 10 years, Mike, you just extend the lease 7.5 years and then on the 2.5 remaining, that comes out to 10.
yeah, I mean, I think that you could,
So,
I mean, if that's what, again, I don't know. I mean, if this is the moving and how that works into this equation for starting a business and buying goodwill, again, I don't really want to be the judge of that, but I think that the question becomes, do we want to lock it in for 10 years or not? And if the answer is yes, then I would propose the same thing I was just saying. I would extend the lease for I would give them 2.5 years under their current term. I mean, I don't want to extend it in case you can't find it. I don't think it's in your best interest to extend it and not have the buyer locked up. But I'm trying to avoid you having to come through a public hearing process to assign the lease. So, because currently the lease says you have to come through city council to be able to sign the lease. I believe that's what it says.
So,
Am I right on that? So I'm trying to get you to where you can actually sell this thing, but I'm also trying not to totally tie the hands of the city and put us in a bad spot. So I'm
okay, well, so I think we don't have to come up with a language tonight because this has to come back to us in any case. And I think the answer is to, number one, do we want to do this? And if so, let Mark work through with Cliff and whatever, Mike, you might have more input after the meeting, but the general principles are the same, which are, to delegate to the city manager the assignment to make sure that their first term is at least 10 years, or can be 10 years at the tenant's option.
Yeah, I would want to go no longer than 10 years on and again, I'm just one. I would say whatever from assignment, I would want it, or from amendment, I would want it to go no longer than 10 years.
On the initial term.
No, I would give them a 5-year initial term and a 5-year option. If that's, I still think the 7.5 is enough, but if I'm not voted on that, I would say 5 years as an initial term with a 5-year option, which is what was presented in the lease that was put out for the two that were coming in before. And I won't even, I would do everybody a disservice to try to pronounce the names, but the two tenants that were here before. So, but I would suggest that so they wouldn't have to come through a public hearing process. If the decision of city council is to continue a bed and breakfast, I would suggest doing an amendment to the existing lease that states a term of no more than 10 years in an initial term of 5 or 2.5, but then a 5-year option on that, and allow the assignment discretion to be with the city manager. That would be my path forward on this, so that it wouldn't have to come back through city council to have the assignment of this go forward.
Okay, so this is a discussion item, we're not gonna vote on it tonight, but, I mean, I think we do need to have some kind of, I hate to use the term head bob, but at least some
Maybe
kind
they
of.
can give us come back and give us 2-3 choices or some kind of different styles. I mean, the head bob?
Well, you can give us direction. You just can't make a decision. You can tell, if there's 5 of you telling me the same thing,
So
I'm doing it.
So
That's true.
Mike seems to have gotten us halfway there, and so we have to agree on the length of terms I personally, I don't think this is a viable business down the road, but.
Well, why is that up to us at this point?
I know, I just want to make sure that when the time comes, we get out of this with
And I wasn't cutting, and just so I was really trying, because 7.5, the original tenant was 10. So I really wasn't trying to be that drastic here, because they got 2.5 left. I was giving them a 5-year option at the discretion of the tenant. And I figured that would potentially be more attractive, because if Mike is right, that maybe this doesn't look as rosy in the future, well then they've got a 2.5 year out, and we're not obligated as the city, and they can get out. But if it's great, and we like this new operator, and they're as great of a steward of that property as the previous owners, well then we would say, let's in 5 years, let's give them 2 more 5-year options.
Well, the lease doesn't have an acceleration clause in it, right? So if they can't complete the term of the lease because the business goes under, then there's no accelerator, right? So we just have to actually just cancel the lease.
But that's not what an acceleration clause would do. Acceleration would just mean you'd be collecting all.
You'd have to pay, right, so
But you can
exactly,
still-
so they're
there's-
not in it for 2.5 more years at that point in your hypothetical to be having to come up with the $1,800 a month, right?
I think this is just a lease list, I think they would owe us for the remainder of the term.
You're still
Do
obligated.
they owe us for
Yeah.
the whole term?
You're still obligated, whether you can accelerate it or not, you're still obligated to the term. All acceleration does is allow you to collect it in one shot, but courts don't like that. 'Cause
So
it's
it's
a
a
total.
commercial reasonableness with finding a new tenant, which we would have a diligent requirement to do.
If we wanted to accelerate.
Well, which brings up the point, do we want that? Do we want somebody to feel, I mean, if the business is failing and they don't want to do it any longer.
We're certainly not going to,
Well, but that's what I'm saying, is that the business is failing because it's not a viable business anymore. Either people, let's say hypothetically in 10 years from now, people don't want to come to Maitland and stay in that house, for whatever reason it is. If nobody else is gonna buy the business because it just simply cannot function, not due to the lack of competency of the people who are trying to run it, it's just not a viable business. What is our obligation to be stuck to this lease? And so in that case, do we want to be able to collect all of the remaining rent at once because then we're going to do something else with the property, or do we want to hold on to that lease term and leave it there? I'm just trying to present options to your point, which is if it's not a viable business, what happens to it next? But also, if it is a viable business, we want the market to dictate that, and we want to give these people an opportunity to run it, so.
Well, we could put in here in the term, allowing the tenant to terminate the lease on a certain notice, so a year notice or whatever.
Right, I don't want to hamstring anyone to it either, because if it's not working.
I also was proposing, and again, I was really trying, that we would do something to forgive the rent, to do some sort of rent leniency on the immediate. That was my second part of that.
I like that idea too. If they, actually, let me ask that question, Mark, what has happened to the business in the last month or two? Have we
You've canceled all your reservations, haven't you, Carol?
Actually, I closed because those people were gonna take over.
Yeah.
And then they didn't take over, so I had to cancel those reservations that were coming up. There's 3 of them I had to get back money to. I am officially blocked off right now, figuring out what to do. We're going to Maine in 2 days. Our stuff is on a pod, heading that way.
Okay,
We've
so
been
you're
working
trying
on
to,
this for quite a long time. We had everything sewed up, everything was done, everything was perfect, and then they came to the meeting and heard words, and
okay, so.
words have consequences.
Thank you. And so Mike, your point is to give them some relief on this.
Correct. So my thought is, again, structuring it with the amendment of their existing lease, not extend the lease now, but because I don't think that would be in their best interest just to do that until they've assigned it, but then give the ability to assign it with the certainty of a renewal option. That would be and then we wouldn't have to go through a public hearing process. Whatever that extension length is, we can talk about that, but my proposal is to come back with an amendment to the existing lease that gives an option to extend and gives the discretion of the assignment to city manager or designee. And that would be the ordinance that comes back.
So
With a rent abatement until there's a new tenant?
With a rent abatement until, I think, let's say, until they find a new tenant or 6 months.
So
Just to revisit the
So
topic.
we'd be redoing this so Ballards could sign a new agreement with us that would allow them to assign it.
Yeah, it would, in my opinion, and they can tell me I'm wrong, but it would give them the ability to go market this without saying, oh, by the way, we're going to strike a deal, but then you're going to have to go and listen to these 5 people, and hopefully they say nice things about it, but 5 bozos talk about your lease, and you may or may not like what they hear. This would give them the certainty that they would not have to come through a city council with a prospective buyer to.
So I think what we would do is you would bring back to us, Mark, a new lease amendment with Joe and Carol. We would go through the public hearing and ordinance process with that new lease with Joe and Carol. It wouldn't be executed until after the second reading. And it would allow, I guess we would have a certain term would be, it wouldn't extend the term right now, but it would allow the Ballards to assign it to a given party, and at that time, the term would start anew.
No, we would give them, the term would keep going, but then the successor purchaser would have the option to renew it.
And Mayor, since this is just a discussion, and we do have the Ballards here, and we're chatting this up, the recruiting maybe asking what their thoughts are, what we're talking about. Is it that's able to be discussed? This is just a discussion, just a question.
Well, let me ask, does the terms that we're talking about make sense to you all? Is that helpful to you? Certainly anything that means you don't have to come back here again would certainly be something you like.
Yeah, who's gonna go with it?
Joe, you-
Jack.
We really want to go through this whole process unless it's helpful to you.
Yes, it makes sense. Joe Ballard, 251 Lake Avenue. Yeah, so I think what Mark had suggested was that, or you did, Mayor, is that we create a new lease with potentially almost the same terms, but with some modified terms, where the actual length of the lease would be like it is now, 5-year with 5-year extension. That seems to be fine. That didn't scare away any of our prospective buyers. But 5 and 5 was fine. It's when they heard that with only 5 without an extension or not the surety of an extension, that's when they got a little, worried about it. I think having a new lease that, for us, would then kind of make it nice and clean, because then we could just, once we get a prospective buyer, which we expect to potentially have within the next month, within the month of, hopefully September, then we would just transfer it, and that would be if you said the city manager and staff could handle that, then it would just be a matter of them vetting this new buyer and reassigning the lease. So it really makes sense to just give us basically just amend our current lease. Because for 2.5 years we don't, basically that would just go away. We would start with a new lease in about, it's going to take 2 weeks at least to read the ordinance twice. So it's going to take through the month of September. By that time, we may have a new prospective buyer. So the timing could work out, and then we would sign that lease, and we would start on that term, and we may only be on that new lease for a month or a couple weeks. So that's not going to affect anyone. They just take it over. It just continues on. We're in the first lease period of 5 years. We maybe go into it for a couple weeks, then we transfer it to somebody. So it's 9 years and 11 months, essentially. So I think that would be the cleanest, in my opinion, and I think my wife agrees. It would be the cleanest solution. Would just be to execute a new lease for 5 and 5, and with some modifications to some of the terms. They had put in that the new buyer would have a deposit. They put down a deposit. We never did that when we executed the lease. There are a few things in the lease that can be cleaned up.
Well, the problem with you signing right away on a new 5-year lease is that you're bound to a 5-year term. And like was trying to point out, you're only bound for 2.5 now. You're not doing yourself a favor necessarily by signing up for 5 unless you're able to terminate it.
So the other way to do it would be to just draft a new lease and get it approved through your 2 readings, and then not actually execute it. And then, so it just sort of sits there. We continue under our current lease. The new lease with the new terms, we can actually present to buyers. That's really what they want to see. They want to see the new lease and what they're getting into. So we don't have to execute the new lease until we're done with our current lease. But we could have a lease that has all the terms, everything is ready to go, and this is, when we present it to the buyer, this is what you're getting. You're getting a lease with the city of Maitland, 5-year term with a 5-year extension. And these are the terms, and they can have their lawyers look at it, and that would probably be the other way to do it.
Okay.
I don't necessarily want to sign a new lease.
Well, we can figure it out.
I just want to have a new lease that we can present to the buyer.
But we don't have to have an ordinance on an executed lease.
Right.
That's correct. It's the idea of leasing property that has to be approved by ordinance.
Okay. Well, thank you, Joe. I think that's helpful.
Okay, good.
So if that's the case, then the ordinance that we already had on the first reading, which did have the specific language, does that die by effect because it has the specific language in it, or are we only approving in the spirit of the lease?
At least had their names on it.
It had it, right, but you're saying if the ordinance could be.
The ordinance could be a lease, ordinance to approve the form of a lease for I guess we'll call it the Thurston House, with the terms that we talked about. As Mr. Bella said, he would be able to continue under the current remaining 2.5 years, with or without, which we haven't got to, whether there will be renovation or whatever other stuff. But the new lease would be, what were your ideal terms, given a continued use as a bed and breakfast for a new tenant, which I think is 5 plus a 5 extension with whatever other term would be there, and you'll approve the form of the lease. You've already said the assignment would be subject to Sharon, and then you'd roll right in from there since this one will be assigned, it would be terminated, if I understand correctly, and go right into this one, the tenant would be brought forward. And that's the only part I don't know, because the assignment, we were waiving approval, but if it's a new lease with a new party, it's not an assignment. So do you want them to bring them back here so you can have a meet and greet? How do you want to do that?
Okay. Anybody else have a question for Joe? No? Okay, thank you, Joe. Okay. Mark, are you getting what you wanted to get out of this? Confused.
No, I think that it's pretty straightforward, that we're basically looking at the same lease with just adjustments in assignability and term.
That's actually not, I don't think, what you heard.
All three people know.
Well, that's actually not even what he just said, is what you asked. So there's not going to be an assignment. Under what we just heard is, there would be a new lease. And so it would be a new lease, there would be no assignment.
Well, when he said new lease, I took that to mean amended lease. But because we would amend this lease to amend it to include an assignability clause.
Still a lot of, I actually.
Okay, I think, yeah, what Joe was saying is he would keep the existing lease, it still has 2.5 years on it. We would approve a new lease.
Form of a new lease.
Form of a new lease for a new owner. They would do their due diligence, find the owner, we would vet them. Then they would come after it's done, and they would sign the lease because you guys have already approved the lease.
It wouldn't be approval of the lease, it would be approval of the tenant. And that would be separate than an assignment because it's a new lease.
Yep.
That's the point.
That's correct.
All right.
So that lease would just sit there until.
Yeah, it would be a document that's been through the ringer, had the approval, and we just have the blanks. Then they can take that document and say, if you're approved, this is what you get to sign. Like if I applied for a rental in an apartment here, here's the lease you'll be asked to sign if you get through our credit check and whatever we do. Same idea.
Yeah. That's what I meant. It would be a new lease. It still has the assignment clause in it, like we do in the current lease.
Yeah.
But in this case, we're not assigning it.
So the
Your
new.
city is approving it.
So the new lease would not have an assignment, it'd be the same assignment
Yeah,
clause, which is to say.
a new
subject to our approval.
tenant would have to come to city council to assign the lease to someone else.
And the new tenant would have to be approved by council in the first instance because it's not an assignment. It'd be as if there was never a ballot,
Yes.
and this is my proposal, I'd like a
Yep.
lease. Am I good?
Yep.
I think that's worse, personally, but y'all can do, I'm outnumbered on this one, but I think that's worse for them. Because then you're making them go through a city council approval process to get a new tenant. So, I was trying to short circuit that, but
The next tenants would have to go through city council if they wanted to assign that lease to someone else.
But I think, Mike, that's not what Mike's saying, I don't think. Mike, we have to go through a two-step ordinance process in any case. Even if we're doing the assignment, if we're amending this lease to allow assignability, we're going to go through it.
Sure.
So if that's the case, I don't see any harm in just going ahead and having the lease just have it on the shelf, just ready to go when it's
Yeah.
time.
And-
Although it doesn't help the balance, because you're still on the hook for 2.5
And
years.
as long as we've approved the leasing of the property, I don't know that there's anything, just like it wouldn't be anything wrong with allowing the assignment provision of the existing lease to be delegated in terms of decision-making to the city manager to say the approval of the new tenant would also be. There's nothing in the charter about that. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they'd have to come back here, but in the absence of action by you saying, hey, we don't need to see the new tenant, if Sharon or Mark says they're good, they do the background checks, they're all good, they're good.
that would be there, I would definitely go for that. I would not have this come back. If I'm trying to help them out, I would not have the approval of the tenant come back. Whatever we decide, the selection of the tenant shouldn't come back to city council. I'm all for approval of the document up front, just don't make them come back with the new tenant. That's what I was trying to say.
Okay.
I think it makes it worse for them.
You would deny them the privilege of enjoying being.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For the good of everyone here.
I won't take that personally.
Just out of curiosity, so you're going to Maine, and so who's gonna take care of the property and all that, or?
I will be coming back in a couple of weeks, depending on how things went tonight.
But it'll be empty for a couple, we need to,
We're working with several people to try to get somebody to purchase, and I would have to come back. All our stuff is moved, it's out of there, all our personal stuff.
See, they had a plan and they canceled everybody who was staying there, so.
well, I'm just saying, as far as maintaining
Chance.
the house, how long is
No,
it?
the city, all the maintenance, Jason, Joe, everybody's aware of the fact that we're not gonna be there.
Right.
They take care of it.
They have a key, they know the place. I work very closely with Public Works.
So what this doesn't do, though, with this new proposal doesn't do is it doesn't let the Ballards off the hook for the remainder of their term in case they don't find something. And so they're, at this point, like any tenant is, any landlord, they're on the hook for the entire term. And if we amend the lease, we can amend that part of the production, amend the lease for a template lease. That hasn't solved that problem for them, I don't know. Maybe we can cross that bridge when we come to it.
I still propose the 6-month rent, 6 months until they get whatever strategy we pick from September 2021 for up to 6 months.
Okay.
We defer rent.
Okay, so we don't.
Right.
Well, on that aspect of it, because we're just be approving the format of the lease, what about the rent abatement piece of it?
I guess the question you're asking is, do we need to actually amend the lease in order to
Yeah.
get the abatement, or can we vote to abate to a resolution or a motion?
What we're talking about is not requiring rent payments.
The terms of the lease are not what's required, it is the lease of property itself that has to be approved for the charter. It doesn't go more detail to that. And so at the end of the day, so long as we approve the lease, the terms could be subject to negotiation by the city manager's office. Similarly here, on the abatement, as long as the council agrees that abatement is what's required, then that could be a negotiated item with perhaps Kathy, we've already talked about 6 months, not an issue.
Okay.
So I would say regardless of the path forward, I don't know if we're not making a decision, but my suggestion was to say that the city manager has discretion to grant a rent abatement and fund the current tenants for up to 6 months, effective September 1.
Sounds good. How you feeling, Mark?
Feeling good?
All right. Is there anything more you'd like from us?
No, those are the only changes, and move forward, get with Cliff, make sure it's all put together, and
I took notes, I'm good.
I took notes too, so we'll compare notes.
And of course, Mike, if you, Lindsay, if you have any more to answer, Mike, if you have any more, you know where to reach you.
Yeah, but as far as the direction, we're gonna make the changes that we talked about here. I don't wanna be getting a call from one council person saying, I want you.
No, the direction is what you kind of take from us on,
Yeah.
that you've heard in this public meeting.
All right.
It was very public stuff. All right. I think that takes care of the Thurston House item.
Yep.
Okay, we good? Yeah. Okay, reports. Does the city attorney, besides regaling us with your fishing tale?
It was lovely, I highly recommend it, and I also highly recommend not watching the news, which I didn't do for 5 days. God was that Lord. But other than that, I have nothing.
You see any bears?
Funny enough, we were where bears should have been all over us, but they tell you to make a lot of noise, and apparently we excelled at that, and we never saw one, so we were good.
Absolutely, thank you.
All right, Mr. Assistant City Manager, any report?
A couple of little quick updates. I think Maria's reminded you that the ULI Technical Advisory Panel TAP study for the west side the meeting will be this Friday from 12:30 to 4:30 to go over everything. Lunch will be provided. There are menus at your seats here, so if you could just get with Kathy or Maria, let you know what you would like. let them know what you would like. That would be great. So be there or be square.
All right.
Also, Jay laid an announcement in front of you on the first annual Maitland Jazz and Blues Festival. It's going to be our first attempt at a large weekend event in April. So that's just to sort of give you a heads up. You're going to see a bunch of promotional material coming out, so we didn't want it to catch you by surprise. So you're first to know that this has been planned for several months now. Jay's been putting a lot of hard work into it. We're hoping it's going to be a really big weekend for our downtown.
I'll just throw something out there, Jay. If you want to guarantee at least 2,000 more people to this, you'll get the Maitland Middle and Winter Park High School Jazz Bands to play. They will fill up the place with parents.
And last but certainly not least, as you're all, I'm sure, aware, Teresa C. Walker, our Human Resources and Risk Management Director, will be retiring after over 36 years of service to the city. That will be in November. Obviously, we all wish her well. It's been great working with her for the last 5 years. She's provided certainly me invaluable advice, and her experience is immeasurable. That being the case, I'd like to announce that Liberty Gondar, our risk management person, has been promoted to Risk Management and Human Resources Director. She's been working over the last several years to gain experience, improve her skills, advance her education. She's just been a godsend to us over there, grooming herself specifically to put herself in a position to make herself available for this position, and she's by far the best person we possibly have for that. So we wish Teresa well, and we certainly look forward to working with Liberty in her new position, and now we're in the position of having to fill a risk management position.
Okay, that's wondering. I thought I heard you say she was now going to be Director of Risk Management and Human Resources?
It's risk management and human resources is the department.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now you got a risk management role to fill.
Yes.
That's great.
Yep. That's all I have.
Anybody else have any reports? No? All right, no reports. We're done here. Thank you.